Hi there, Dave Kamens from Kann Talent Coaching, and this episode of Mic Drop is pretty darn special. Pleased to have you alongside when we discover one of the great tigers of all time. There's a Bengal tiger, there's Miguel Cabrera from the Detroit Tigers, and now we've got one from the University of Missouri. Come on along and meet Stacey Woelfel. So pleased to be joined by Stacey Woelfel. Am I saying that right, good professor?
It's Woelfel. Yeah, you're very close. Very
Woelfel.
close. It's a tough name. I've
It,
never
it,
met anybody with my last name who isn't directly related to me, so it's pretty rare.
wow. There you go. Nice. Somehow, my dad decided to shorten our name and take out a lot of vowels. So it's down to Kamens. What a pleasure to meet you. I've read up on you a bit, and anybody with 3 degrees from a university or any universities is wiser than me. So what a pleasure to meet you. And you've
Likewise.
helped so many students. I mean, can you count the number of people whose lives you have impacted?
I tried to look, so 35 years of teaching, and I thought for a moment, I wonder how many students that is. And frankly, I was teaching small courses, so it's, 3 or 4 thousand students. I'm sure there are professors who teach massive classes that could claim 50,000 students, but that's not me.
Well, I may be long in the tooth, but I remember the larger classes were the ones I was able to kind of not zonk out. I never fell asleep, but pay less attention. When you have just a few students, that's where the power resides, huh?
Well, and really is, I mean, where you can see everybody's face and tell if they're paying attention. I would sometimes rib my some of my colleagues who'd say, "Oh, the kids are on their computer or their phone while we're in class." I'm like, "They don't do that in my class. Maybe you're not interesting enough. I'm keeping their attention better than you are, maybe."
Stacy, walk me through how you got to where you are, which is in a beautiful state of semi-retiredness, but you're
Mhm.
still helping the University of Missouri. I'd love to know more about your beginnings and really what your thoughts were as maybe a young teen. What was Stacy going to do?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I grew up in the suburbs of St. Louis and got interested in journalism pretty late. I was actually going to be a professional musician, like an orchestra musician. I played all of the brass instruments and thought that that would be a career for me. And I was going to concerts and I started looking at the musicians and they looked bored. It didn't look like it was fun. And for me to play was fun. And I'm like, well, maybe if I make that a job, that won't be fun anymore. And so I got into the journalism class because all of my friends were in it. And, I dabbled around with photography. I liked cameras. I guess, again, this is the mid 70s we're talking about here. So everything, manual, nothing digital. Um, got into the journalism class and loved it. I have an identical twin brother who's also in the business, and we kind of did the same thing at the same time. And so then the obvious choice was to go to Mizzou, the University of Missouri, world's greatest and first school of journalism. Came here. My initial idea was to be a photographer, a still photographer, like a newspaper photographer. And again, remember, it's the mid 70s. Late 70s by then, everything was in the dark room. You had to develop film by hand, and I just hated working in the dark room. I felt like a mole. I'd come out of there and I couldn't stand the sunlight. I'd be in there for hours. And so I switched over to television and probably love that more than photography anyway. So graduated in 1981. First job was in Orlando at the NBC affiliate there, WESH TV. I was a TV news photographer and later ran the assignment desk there. So that was the beginnings of my career off to Florida. Interestingly enough, my brother, again, twin brother, his first job was briefly in Tulsa and then in Richmond. And then he worked at the same station in Orlando for a while. So we were both there, identical twins. He was a producer. I was the photographer and assignment editor. And we worked there together for a little bit. I had no real intention of going into teaching, but one of my professors from Mizzou came down to do a writing seminar, and my wife and I were sort of itching to get out of Orlando at that point. I'd started to send out some feelers. I had a job offer, a couple of things that didn't interest me too much, and he said, we need a professor. you might be good. And so I hadn't thought about it, but thought it over, go, yeah, I'll go do that for a couple of years and figure out where I'll go. And then 35 years later, I retired after that. So obviously found the job that I really loved once I got here.
Let me pick up on a couple of quick things there. You made a choice to go to a school with a great reputation. When I was a kid making these decisions, I wasn't sure, right? It's one of those giant decisions in your life that you kind of know is a big deal, but you don't. And when you comes to making choices, sometimes it's financial and availability and
Right.
who accepts you and where you can get in. But reputation is deserved in the university space, isn't it? I know you're a little, you can lean towards Mizzou, but it's deserved.
I think yes. It takes a long time to build a reputation, like in many things, and you can lose it more quickly. And so, we're lucky at the University of Missouri, particularly on the television side, that in 1953 they decided to start a commercial television station that could
Mhm.
operate as a teaching lab. And so, that gave me a chance to do real television. And this TV station does 6 newscasts a day, 365 days a year. It's not a lab experience for students. So as a student, I was able to put together a tape, as we had back then, to show my work and go out and get a job in a big market. I went to the biggest market of anybody in my class, Orlando, which was, I think, market 27 back then, something like that. And uh, that the school allowed me to do that. So, the challenge for every school, Mizzou and all the others, is to make sure you can't rest on your laurels because the business is changing, the technology is changing, and I'm biased, but I think the school's done a good job maintaining its reputation.
And putting together a tape is something kids and adults still do, right? That's how
We
you
call it a
get.
reel now, but which is also sort of an archaic term as well. But yeah, it's a
Of
reel.
course, but the
Quite right.
concept is the same. So we're still doing that the same way. You're collecting good clips, whether they're from an on-air station or whether you film them yourself. That's
Mhm.
how you get to where you want to go. It's your calling card. Yeah, sure, it's your website, your YouTube channel, but it's still your reel, and it's easier if you're doing it at a place that provides you that practical experience. I
Yeah,
wanted to.
and one of the things I tell people, I see students, I still, again, I'm retired but working part-time, and one of the things I deal with students is helping them connect with recruiters from different companies. So I get to see their reels, and one of the things I tell them is don't wait until you have an interview to put a reel together. You should have one now. Whenever I'm talking to you, you should have a reel now. And every time you work, whether it's once a day, once a week, once a month, is what you did today better than what's already on the reel? If it is, swap it out. It's so easy now. Back in the day on a tape, we'd have to re-edit the whole tape to add something in the middle. Now
Yeah.
you just drop that story in. So your reel should be as fresh as whatever the last time you worked was.
I also want to go back and touch on the fact that you were a camera person and an assignment editor.
Hmm.
That speaks to saying yes. And it also speaks to all the experience you get up the line benefits you later on, no matter what you're doing. If you're a producer, you're a better producer if you were a camera guy. If
Absolutely.
you were if you're an on-air reporter, it's way cool experience to be an assignment editor, right? I mean, there you are, you've got every story on your desk, along with the news director, you're helping make decisions as to what's going to be covered and how.
Right, absolutely. What I started as a photographer, and I love that. I love the creative side of it. I like to be out of the building and doing that. And I always contend that in TV news, you're either an inside person or an outside person. If you're an outside person, you want to be a reporter, a photog. You don't want to sit around the building. But producers, they got their sweaters and their snacks, and they like to sit in there and they're ready to go all day. But after being a photog for a while, I was like, the assignment desk interests me because right now I have my part of the newscast is about a minute and a half at the end of the night. But if I'm the assignment editor, I have something to do with the entire newscast. I'm helping guide what's going to be on the air tonight. And so I ended up making that transition in Orlando. And that was my first faculty job here, in fact, was a faculty assignment editor at the TV station.
Okay. Let's go back to some of the people that mentored you, that helped you make these great decisions. Maybe they
Mhm.
were professors, maybe they were guidance counselors, whomever. Share a guidepost that they provided for you, a reason, something to look forward to, a North Star, it's sometimes called. What was that for you to to want to excel, to want to drive, and maybe even it drove you to come back to the school to help?
Yeah, I can mention a few things. There was a reporter that I worked with at WESH who's long retired. I ended up sort of back in touch with him a couple of years ago, a guy named Rick Moore. And so we would team up, the photographers and reporters would work together for a couple of weeks and then we'd rotate. And so I always enjoyed working with him because he was a master at working sources and meeting people. And I just, there's things, it's like yesterday, this was 40 something years ago, but we would go out and we'd pull into a city hall at some place. We had kind of a geographic beat, and so we'd pull into a city hall, and I'd start to get the camera. I was like, no, no, no. He goes, we're just going to talk to people. And so he'd kind of breeze into the building. He'd just plop
Hmm.
down in a chair by, a secretary or whatever. He'd put his head in the mayor's office. And he had his notebook and wouldn't do anything then. He was just shaking hands and talking. And we'd come out, he'd pull out the notebook and he'd write down 5 story ideas he got from that stop. And I'm like, we do anything here today? He goes, no, not today, but I got a whole list of things we're going to do over the next couple of weeks and stuff. So he was a master at that, and I learned a lot about working a crowd, working sources, and figuring out where you could go from there. And on the faculty side, the guy that hired me, it's funny. I was just talking to somebody about him yesterday. A guy named Mackie Morris, who's very famous in this business, and he was faculty member for me here when I was a student, and then was the guy that came to Orlando and gave the writing seminar and hired me back. And so he was a terrific leader for the program, passionate about journalism, passionate about doing it well, writing and storytelling and things like that. And so many lessons, more than I could recount here, that I learned from him.
Let's talk about writing. Let's talk
Hmm.
about writing and news or sports, even weather. The importance of being able to tell a story, to have things that drive you to get from a beginning, middle, and end in the old parlance. It still is true today, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it may be even more true. I think as people read less, we see a little resurgence here and then. We've seen some resurgence thanks to the Harry Potter books that young people read fiction a little bit more. Long magazine articles pop up here and there. But the way people consume media, I think TV news and people on television have a little bit of a responsibility to protect the language and to use writing well. It kills my ears when I listen to a newscast and somebody's got one of these stripped down sentences where they've taken out all of the verbs and, man in jail, whatever, something like that. I'm like, oh, write in a complete sentence, active voice, complete sentence, please, because the language changes. I understand that, and I can be an old guy and complain about some things that I hear change, but we need to protect how that works a little bit. And for students and young people coming into the business, to learn how to write well, it's probably still the most important skill. You can be great with a camera, you can be great on camera. Young people today, they're all performers because they're doing it on social media. So that's great, but to be able to turn a good phrase and really grabs people by the ears to get them to listen is maybe the most important skill.
Do you have a favorite book or means by which someone should learn better themselves as a writer?
It's interesting because, all those years of teaching, I almost never had a textbook because I just found that they either quickly fell out of date. There were books that I would assign for class, but they tended to be about other things. There's a great book called The Checklist Manifesto that's about basically how checklists work, and that seemed like an odd thing to teach in a journalism class, but it's something that I have assigned to people to say, take a look at, you make mistakes often because you haven't gone step by step through what you need to do. So I assign books like that. Writing books are tough. There are a couple of long time books for our business um, that help people with the basics of writing. But I think the best example is to find somebody you like, find the work of somebody you like. It's easier today than ever before because it's all up online someplace. And somebody like a Boyd Hoopert who works up in Minnesota, or Jason Lamb, or some other folks that I can mention who are just beautiful writers and use English so well on television. They merge the words with the pictures and use the medium well. I think that's the best way to learn. Find somebody that you like their work and just copy what they do, frankly, emulate them.
When it comes to being a reporter, when it comes to being a news producer, those are kind of the, news director even.
Hmm.
What are some of the traits that you look at a student and you go, oh, they have it.
Hmm.
Why does it work that way? I've always worked that way where I work with people, maybe they start out as interns or photographers, videographers with me, and I spot them. I'm like, oh, that's a producer in the making, in the works.
Right.
Why is that? And maybe, what are the traits that you've seen over the years?
One trait that's across the board, regardless of what sort of part of the profession you want to go into, is I can look and tell whether you're having fun or not. And I'll call it a student newsroom, though KOMU is very much a professional newsroom in a way. I could tell the people who are having fun and wanted to be there versus the ones who weren't having fun and didn't want to be there. And I would usually, the ones I thought were not having fun, there'd be a conversation, a few months in usually, where I'd pull them aside. I go, does your stomach hurt every time before you have to head out to the newsroom? Are you dreading Tuesdays because that's the day you're here? And I was almost always right. They would say yes. And I was like, then this is probably not for you. And that's not a failure. That's a success to know that you don't want to do this before you go sign a 3-year contract to work in Tupelo is a big success. So let's talk about what else you might like. And, often they were interested in something journalism adjacent or whatever it might be. So that
Mhm.
was the main thing. But the people who are having fun, I could tell right away. And I knew that they were going to lap this up and love it. On the specific job titles, the producers obviously were the people who were organized, who were meeting deadlines, who had sort of a big picture view of things, and would get sort of impatient if they, were assigned just to one story. And they also, frankly, didn't like going out to meet people that much. They weren't into that. I one time summed up, being a reporter is going out in bad weather to ask rude questions to strangers. For a lot of people, they just hate that. Um, and so the producers were pretty easy to spot. And the reporters were those people. They couldn't sit down. It's the people who were always standing around the newsroom waiting to go. And they were people, and they wanted to get out and talk to people. And they were curious. Of course, all journalists should be curious, but reporters, particularly curious people who, would turn around and follow that fire truck that just went the other way, even though they were on deadline to get back to the station. They'd call in like, a fire truck just went the other way. I'm going to go see where it's headed. Those are the people I knew would be successful reporters.
That's great. Yesterday, I happened to be at a dentist office and getting my, twice annual cleaning or what have you. And the person that was working on me, the hygienist, she mentioned at some point that she was OCD. And I'm like, well, you're perfect for this job. You're going to get every nook and
Every little bit.
cranny.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. That's ideal. What a great choice by you. Um, it goes the same way in a newsroom a little bit.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, a trait for any journalist, is I think we're easily bored. I have a high school friend I still stay in touch with. He was the class clown in high school, and loads of fun, but he ended up being an accountant, and I'm sure he's a very good one. And I'm not, we have to have accountants in the world, but I could not go to work and stare at a spreadsheet every day. And I even asked him about it. He goes, when it all works out at the bottom of the spreadsheet, that just is the best feeling for me. And I'm like, okay, I get it. That's not for me, but if it works for you. And so we're easily bored. And the fact that the job is something different every day, yeah, I'd go crazy if it weren't that.
That's fantastic. I know a pile of accountants and they love that zero, that bottom.
Mhm.
You're absolutely right. When it comes time to advise someone on a career move, what are some of your go-tos? You've done this over the years, I'm sure. You've worked with them practically in the newsroom and in the classroom. Pardon me. How do you advise next steps?
Right. So when the students are approaching graduation, as you said, we talked about before, there are people in interviewing, and the recruiters come here and that sort of thing, and they're trying to decide. And we're in the enviable position that our students often have multiple offers when they graduate. So they're thinking, oh, can't, what's the right one? What's the wrong move? So the first thing I always say is it's almost impossible to make the wrong move at this point. No, when you graduate, you can go to point A, you can go to point B. They're both going to be fine, probably. There's almost never a bad move to make like that. So I start to have them think about some other things that aren't necessarily journalism related, So I tend to encourage people to go somewhere far away from where they're from so they can experience another part of the country. And we ran through a phase because I'm because I'm old enough. I had students who were baby boomers and students who were Gen X and students who were millennials and now students who are Gen Z. And so four generations of students. And so I'm a baby boomer, Gen X. We just wanted a job. We were going to move wherever and take it. Millennials all wanted to move back home. Wherever I was from, I wanted to move back there. And so that's when I really, I think, got on this notion of go someplace else. You're from Ohio, that's great. Move to Arizona, move to Florida, see something that's totally different. You might love it, you might hate it, but you can always move back to Ohio. It's going to be there. And so I think that's a big part is to try to get them to stretch their boundaries. I will say Gen Z is much more like, I'll move wherever. It doesn't matter where I live. So it's kind of rotating back around with them. So I definitely want them to do that. I want them to choose someplace where they think they can grow. They want to go out to a place where like, I'm going to be the best reporter as soon as I get there. And I'm like, well, that sounds great and it's good for your ego, but you don't want to be the best reporter. You want to be the worst reporter when you get there, actually, so that you can learn from the people around you. I mentioned this guy, Rick Moore, that I worked with. I learned a ton from him and the other older people. I was only 21 when I started in Orlando. Everybody else in that newsroom was 30 years old. So I had a ton of people to learn from there. So I said, get yourself out to a place where you can have people to look up to, people you can learn from, but don't go too big. And sometimes our students will get an offer, somebody who's talented to go in someplace big. And I'm like, don't go so big that you can't succeed, that they expect more from you, that you might, have a great reel and they're like, she's the one that's going to come in here. And then you find that you're over your head. And then you'll be back in that boat. You'll be miserable because you can't keep up or whatever it might be. So that's some of the advice I give people.
Nice. We at Can Talent Coaching work with both emerging broadcasters and established that are trying to up their career a bit, move on to the next rung. What about coaching? How do you talk to people about, be it early on, midstream, even later in career? I gather you're a fan of coaching.
Yes, I am. That's what professors are, isn't it? Right? We're just coaches with different titles, same job when it comes right down to it. So, yeah, seek out somebody that can look at your work. It's easy to kind of get into a spiral and think, oh, I'm in a rut. I don't know what to do. I can't make this better. A lot of times there are some peers that can help. I remember a particularly talented student who's been in the business a long time, and her first job was up in Des Moines as a reporter, and she got some like-minded people together who were young. She was a young reporter going in there, usually not a market at that time where you went right out of school. And so she got some other young folks in the market, not necessarily at her station, but she got some other young folks, and they would get together. This was back in the videotape days, so they would get together like once a month, get some pizza at somebody's house, and just play each other's tapes and critique, harshly critique what was going on with it. And this little, society made things better. So talking to somebody else, a professional coach, a peer, somebody you trust, is huge because you just can't tell whether you're getting better, whether you're getting worse, what you need to do. It's too, you know, insular just to try to figure that out on your own. You got to have some outside feedback.
I'm here with Stacey Woelfel, who has 3 degrees from University of Missouri and is
Keep
now,
asking me for money. They just keep asking me for money. That's the problem with having 3 degrees from one school.
and you're still helping them, on the advisory stage and at the station, I gather. Um, what about this changing world? What about digital news gathering? What about, I mean, I'm following someone now who's, in the midst of something in a city and that I'm not in any longer, but I used to live there and every day I'm really I can't wait to see the news that she's bringing because
Hmm.
it's as current as possible. And I don't know. It seems like these one-man bands are becoming as important as anything these days. How does that land with you, and what's your reaction to it, and what do you think of people heading that direction?
Well, the technology has changed a lot since I started in this business and shot on film. I'm just old enough to have shot on film, news stories on film right at the beginning of my career. But I'm a guy that embraces technology, so I don't. resist it. I think it has helped us be more efficient, and I think it has helped us do more with less, which all the companies seem to demand now. So in that sense, it's been a good thing. I'm not a fan of the one-man band setup for safety, among other reasons. The first reason I'm not is when I was a photographer and worked with a reporter, and we were out as a team of two people, I was spending all of my time finding the best shots, thinking visually about how the story would go together, and he was spending all of his time gathering facts, talking to people, doing interviews.
Right.
And then we would get, usually in the car driving back, we would start merging our ideas together. And I'd say, I've got some great shots of this. Be sure you're right to that. He'd say, I want to talk about this. What do you have for that? And it was, two brains putting together one story. And so when you go to the one-man band setup, the multimedia journalist, whatever we want to call it, half your time you're interviewing, gathering facts, the other half you're getting the visuals. And while it does cut out the step of having to merge that together as we used to do, you just don't have as much time, and frankly can't get as good at either one. But it's a reality of the business. My more recent and more maybe urgent worry is that whether it's safe or not. And we've reached a point in society where journalists are targets of anger, usually not physical, but we saw the incident in Sacramento a month ago, I guess, where somebody shot into the TV station. We see and hear threatening words said to reporters all the time. Luckily, not too many physical attacks or anything like that. But I write a Substack, and I just wrote about this a few weeks ago, that I just don't think TV stations should send people out by themselves anymore. With very specific exceptions. If you're going to the NFL stadium to do the news conference with the coach, you're fine going by yourself. You're going to be in a group of people inside in a controlled space. But out on the street alone, particularly at night, we set up a live shot. We have lights. Everybody can see we're there. And for
Mhm.
somebody to do that on her own, I think that's a crazy idea. At least two sets of eyes keeping an eye on what's going on is important. So that's one thing about technology. The other thing I'll say is, we can't talk about technology without mentioning AI. And I won't claim this idea. I was just talking to somebody the other day who really studies this, and he says the thing with AI is everybody looks at it and says, oh, what can we get AI to do to make us more efficient so we don't have to do it anymore? And he said, that's fine. You can use AI to transcribe interviews or something. That's nobody's complaining about that. He says what we should be using AI for is to figure out what we haven't been able to do. What can AI enable us to do that we haven't been able to do before, as opposed to what of our menial tasks is going to take over? And I think that's a great question. I don't have the answer to that question yet, and I think nobody does. I mean, we're all thinking about it, but I think that's a great way to look at technology.
Nice. I'm definitely going to start following you on Substack. So that's good stuff. As of this taping, our friends at NPR are in deep trouble. This to me is a tragedy because of how localized that is, which in its own right is going to do something, I believe, for local news, don't you?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Where do we start talking about all the impacts on local news right now? So we're seeing the business model slowly erode for commercial broadcasting. So and in fact, it's propped up better than it should be. The audiences are dwindling, yet the revenue is still there. And so TV stations have a little bit of time to try to figure this out. Public broadcasters obviously took a huge hit with the loss of federal money earlier this year. Bigger stations in bigger cities, the ones that have local support, are probably going to be fine. It's going to hurt, and they're going to have to make some changes. The ones in rural areas, this is public radio and television, the ones in rural areas that really depended, where that federal money was half or more of their budget, they may go dark. I mean, they're trying to figure out how to do it, or you may see them sort of combine with others, and then they'll lose the locality. If you're in
Right.
Minnesota and you were up in northern Minnesota with an NPR station and the money's just not there and you have to run NPR from Minneapolis, terrific. Minnesota Public Radio is a terrific operation, but it's not going to be up in Duluth all the time doing things up there. So that's sort of the tragedy of both getting hit with both commercial pressures and the loss of federal money, that it probably won't come back. And I said, the administrations change, and the next one may be more friendly to it, but all that money's not instantly going to flow back. It's going other places, or it's gone at this point. So they're going to have to claw to get that back, even with a different administration.
With the checklist manifesto in mind, I want to tick off this little box.
Okay, good.
There's, I love that opportunities for people these days to do what they want to do, to bring that smile to their face is available, right?
Hmm.
Speak to me towards someone a little bit later in their career. Perhaps they were an accountant and they strive to be on air
Right.
or behind the scenes or in front of the camera. What do you say to that person about maybe continuing education? What about, coming in? What do you see on campus these days that speaks to that? Because I think it's never too late to chase your dream. What are your thoughts?
Well, and we're back to technology a little bit here. So many programs have online master's programs, or not even that, certificate programs in some cases, where you can go back in and learn. And you miss out on some of the hands-on approach, but I think online teaching, and those of us who teach have usually been trained to do that. It's different than classroom teaching. I went through a whole series of courses to learn how to teach online, which came in very handy during the pandemic. But you do it very differently. But online offerings are plentiful. I think they're pretty reasonably priced. Often can be done while you're in your current career, because I mean, it'd be great to say, yeah, quit whatever you're doing, go back to school and start over in small market television. Well, when you're, in the middle of your life, you can't afford that often. And so you can do online schooling while you're doing your current job. Sometimes your current job will even help pay for it if it's an online master's degree and your employer supports that. And then and see if you do like it, and see if it's really for you, and then you can start to experiment and do something like that. So I'm a big fan of online education, and it's even a bit of a challenge for universities, because this started with the pandemic, but do I really need to send my young student to, you know, city X across the state someplace, or could they just learn from here? And so I do believe there are experiences, college is more than just going to class. There's a lot of things about campus life and becoming a independent adult and things that you get from moving away to college. But college is very expensive, and I understand parents saying, if we could do this online more cheaply, maybe the kid could stay here and doesn't have to move away. So um, it's the online options are out there, though.
Or or hire a coach, right?
Or
Talk to
hire a
us.
coach.
And yeah,
That's yeah, probably that's probably the most efficient in cost and time. You can do that very quickly. So, but again, it goes back to what I said before. You got to have some external input on this. You can't. I don't think you can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and turn yourself from an accountant into a reporter. Maybe you can, but I think it'd be a lot easier if you had some outside help with that.
Professor Stacey, what a pleasure. It's probably Dr. Stacey at this point. I
It is,
apologize.
but no need to sit on that.
What a delight. Thank you for your time. And
Absolutely.
Kann Broadcast Talent Coaching thanks you from all of us for just doing what you do at a great school. It's certainly close to Craig Cann's heart and our heart. And we got interns from there. And we can't say enough about the program you've teed up for the rest of the world. And best of continued luck to you and
Thanks
yours.
very much. Thanks very much. Craig was back there. I was a young professor when he was in my class, and so it's been great to watch his career and where he's headed from there.
Yeah, he's doing okay. Good man too. As are you. Thanks, Stacy.
You bet.